Hello, my name is Oscar. I study at the Pan American University of Puerto in the Faculty of Education and Humanities School of Modern Languages. In today's video, I'm going to go over the characteristics of a novel in English literature. There are quite a few of them, so let's begin with the first one, which is that the novel has narrative prose. What this means is that the text is written in prose instead of verse, such as the case with poems, epic poems, poetry, and drama. So that's one of the key characteristics and defining traits of the novel. It is written in prose. Next up, it is a extended fictional story. So what this means, um, this characteristic is talking about the length of the novel, because literature comes in very different several formats for storytelling, such as the story, the short story, and then the novel. And again, the novel is an extended fictional story because it is longer than stories or tales or short stories. Okay, next up, another characteristic of, of the novel is the character development. And this relates back to what we just said about the length of the novel. As the story is longer, typically in the novel, in the format of the novel, the characters go through a journey where they experience change. This is all very interesting because the story in a novel often happens because the character, the protagonist, needs to develop or achieve something or change in some way. And there is an opposing force, which is usually the antagonist, that is precisely that, opposed to the character's goal. And this creates conflict. So, as the character struggles to accomplish what they want, what they wish to accomplish, and they try to get to that point B destination to fulfill their purpose and overcome the obstacles put on by the antagonist or the conflict. In that journey, the character, meaning the personality and the very being of the character and characters, because novels have typically two main characters, which are the protagonist, which is the one that the story follows from their perspective, and an antagonist. And we have also secondary characters, which both of these former categories interact and develop. So, as the protagonist struggles to complete their journey, they grow and change, and that is what character development means. But it is not limited to the protagonist. In Since the cast of secondary characters, whether they serve the antagonist or the protagonist, can also develop. And because precisely the length of the novel allows such development. Okay, so again, very related to that characteristic, we have a complex plot. And I have already touched a little bit upon this in the previous characteristic, because the plot is is or the characteristics of the plot in a novel is that it is layered, it is multifaceted, because again, because of the length of the novel, it allows to have a conflict and more characters that act and whose actions have consequences for the story in general. So the plot in a novel is complex, more complex than in a story or a short story. Okay, then we have the setting, which again, the novel tends to describe and expand in a very detailed way on the setting, which is the time and place where the story takes place. If we're talking about a fantasy novel, for example, it is expected that the novel explores in detail the setting. So maybe it is a fictional kingdom, medieval inspired fantasy kingdom. And typically, we could expect in the format of a novel that alongside the story, the reader will be able to understand in depth the, the characteristics of the setting, meaning politics, natural habitats, customs, society, etc. Right? So that's what it means. The novel has the length to cover and expand upon the setting in detail. And the setting is the time or place, the time and place where the story is being told. Next up, we have the dialogue. In the case of the novel, again, dialogue is often very important and very purposefully used when done correctly, because dialogue is not only used to represent conversations between different characters, but for many other purposes, such as advancing the story, developing the characters, showing the, the internal struggles of the characters, or showing what characteristics and traits of themselves they are hiding from other characters, their intentions, etc., etc. So again, this use of complex dialogue ties perfectly into what we have just been discussing about a detailed setting, an extended fictional story, and character development. Okay? Another characteristic of a novel is that it will often have themes. Themes, in a very broad sense, a theme is the lesson or moral of the story in a very simple way to describe the theme, but it's more like the heart of what the writer is saying in the subtext of the story. And what I'm referring to is to not the literary events, not the literal events and the explicit events that take place in the story, but the meaning that's behind what happens in the story is the theme. And novels usually explore themes such as love, trust, companionship, hardship, the horrors of war, or redemption, or the nature of humanity, the moral of humanity, and well, many, many, many other themes that are explored in literature. And ultimately, that is why literature it's much more than entertainment or content, of course, because aside from being a way a way path into other worlds, other stories, other lives that us as readers can experience, it is the novels are, or literature in general, is also a reflection of the human culture and the human soul expressed through stories. And that is why themes are so important. They transcend transcend the little events of the story and connect with the readers and stay with us. Well, let's go on. We only have a few other characteristics to talk about, but I really wanted to make that point about the themes in stories. Next up, we have the point of view. In a novel, we have several options, several ways that this can be done. This is referred to, what this means is from what perspective the story is being told. And the novel can employ first person, for example, following the thoughts and perspective of the main character, or it could also be a third person limited perspective, again following the main character in a third person way, but without access to the thoughts of the other characters. This is very common. Or other omniscient perspectives. But in the point is that the point of view is going to affect how the reader experiences a story. On, in other words, it's going to determine in what shoes are we going to feel when reading the story. And this can be used to a great advantage depending on the genre and the purpose of the story. Okay, finally, we have a couple more characteristics, which are the narrative style, which in the novels actually is very varied, because novel actually means, it comes from a term that was born to describe what is new, what is new in literature, right? So novels typically vary very much in style, and they can choose to opt for a formal and by the books narrative style, or they can experiment. And this is expected. Again, the word novel refers to new, to what's new in literature. And well, finally, the main distinguishing factor for a novel is the length, as we have discussed before when we were talking about the extended fictional story. But talking specifically about length, I reiterate, novels are typically longer than short stories, but they are shorter than epics. So that, I believe those are all the characteristics of a novel that I wanted to discuss with you today. Thank you for joining me today as we discuss this very, very wonderful and exciting topic of novels. And I hope I'll see you on the next video. Goodbye for now.